Imagine a dusty ranch where hope seems to have abandoned the family, a widow and her children battling destitution. But fate, capricious and unpredictable, is about to cross their paths with a stranger. A wealthy cowboy on the brink of death seeks refuge. What would happen if the simplest act of kindness became the key to a future they never dreamed of? Prepare for a story where compassion defies adversity and reveals secrets capable of changing everything. The sun mercilessly scorched the parched Texas earth, transforming every square inch of the Miller Ranch into a cruel reminder of their plight. The fine reddish dust was lifted by the dry wind, creeping into every crack in the small wooden house, covering everything with a blanket of desolation. The air, thick and hot, carried not only the smell of arid land, but also a subtle despair that hung in the air like an invisible mist, stifling any lingering optimism. There lived Sarah Miller, a woman who, despite her young age, barely past 30, carried the weight of an entire world on her shoulders, a burden that aged her with each passing day. Her eyes, once filled with a youthful and dreamy sparkle, now showed deep weariness marked by sleepless nights and incessant worry, yet still overflowed with an unwavering love for her 3 children, the only flame that kept her standing, her reason for being. The eldest, Tom, a 12-year-old, already displayed a seriousness beyond his years, carrying responsibilities that would make many adults hesitate. His hands, once soft, were calloused and cracked from working on the ranch, a premature mark of life's harshness. He spent his mornings checking the few rabbit traps he had set on the edges of the property, his hope diminishing each day that the return was empty or that he found only a small, underfed animal barely worth the effort. His afternoons were dedicated to trying to fix the dilapidated fences, using rusty wire and rotten wood, a constant battle against the ravages of time and the lack of resources, an endless task. His middle sister, Lily, 8 years old, was a small ray of sunshine with her infectious joy, a laugh that was like honey amidst the ranch's bitterness. Although her smile sometimes faded into the shadow of adult worries, she tried to care for the small withered garden, talking to the few stunted plants as if she could persuade them to bloom to bring life where nature seemed to have given up long ago. And the youngest Billy, just 5, still played with his wooden soldiers on the dusty floor of the main room, oblivious to the gravity of the poverty surrounding them. Living in a make-believe universe where danger was just a distant game, and the next meal was not an uncertainty, but a mother's guarantee and unwavering faith in her. The tragic death of John Miller, Sarah's husband and the children's father, a year ago, had been a devastating blow that struck them hard. He was the family's pillar, the strong man who kept the ranch running with sweat and passion, his laughter filling the house and his presence a shield. His absence was a hole not only in Sarah's heart, but in every crack in the house's walls, in every broken fence, in every prolonged silence that echoed the void. With John's death, an overwhelming debt to the greedy and ruthless local banker, Silas Blackwood came to light. Blackwood, a corpulent man with a cold gaze and false smiles that never reached his eyes, used his power and position to crush small landowners, buying their land for paltry sums, enriching himself at the expense of others' misery. He visited the ranch with unsettling frequency, not to offer help, but to remind them of the tight deadlines and the imminent threat of property foreclosure. His unctuous yet cutting voice, sharp as a blade, was a poison Sarah had to swallow with each visit, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. The last warning had been clear, dry and direct, sharp as a whip in the dusty air. If they didn't pay the $1,000 by the end of the month, they would lose everything. The land that held the graves of their ancestors, the house where their children were born, John's legacy, the only shred of dignity they had left, all would be taken by Blackwood, reducing them to nothing. The ranch, which once prospered with a few sturdy cattle and a small corn and bean crop that barely provided for the family, now languished under the relentless sun. The few remaining cows were skeletal, their bones visible beneath their dry skin, and the chickens laid only 1 or 2 eggs a day, insufficient for the family's sustenance, let alone for sale. The main well was almost dry, its muddy bottom visible beneath the little murky water, and the harvest, which should have been their salvation, barely sprouted from the cracked earth, its yellowed leaves indicating an early death even before bearing fruit, an unfulfilled promise. Hunger was a constant companion, a low, persistent growl in each of their stomachs, a familiar ache that Sarah tried to hide. Sarah stretched herself thin, her energy seeming inexhaustible in her struggle to ensure her children had the bare minimum to survive. She spent her nights mending worn clothes by the faint light of a lantern, the needle pricking her calloused fingers from hard work and poor vision. Her days were spent trying to sell eggs and some withered vegetables in the small town of Harmony, long hours by dusty wagon under the strong sun, facing looks of pity or disdain. Every penny was counted, every decision a painful calculation between today's bread and tomorrow's, a battle against scarcity. The humiliation of having to ask for credit or haggle for minimal prices for her produce, while Blackwood circled the town with his greedy smile, was a silent burden she carried in her heart, an invisible weight. Tom, sensing his mother's silent anguish, tried to help as best he could, even though his shoulders were still too small for such a heavy load. He hunted small animals in the nearby forest, rabbits, birds, facing the dangers of venomous snakes and wild animals, and tried to fix the dilapidated fences of the ranch with rusty wire and rotten pieces of wood, a daily battle against the decay that seemed to be winning. He dreamed of being strong like his father, of protecting his family and freeing them from their suffering. Lily, with her fertile imagination and dreamy spirit, tried to cheer up her brother and mother with invented stories of heroes and princesses and drawings, made with charcoal on the wooden walls of the house, trying to bring some color to a gray world. Her childish songs, off-key but full of life, were the only sounds of joy that broke the silence of worry that inhabited the house. Billy, in his blessed innocence, continued to play with his wooden soldiers, oblivious to the anxiety that consumed the adults living in a make-believe universe where danger was just a distant game and the next meal was not an uncertainty, but a mother's guarantee and unwavering faith in her. Despite the shadow of hopelessness that hung over them, Sarah refused to yield. She possessed a quiet strength, a resilience forged in the harshness of life in the Wild West. She was like the gnarled trees that resisted the incessant desert winds, bent by the storm, but never broken. With each sunrise, she clung to the tiny flame of hope, an obstinate stubbornness that something, anything, would change their fortunes. She prayed, worked to exhaustion, and dreamed of a future where her children would not know hunger or humiliation. But days turned into weeks, and the only apparent change was the inexorable advance of debt and the dwindling provisions. The neighbors, although supportive in spirit, also faced their own difficulties and could do little to alleviate the Millers. Burdened beyond an occasional plate of food or a bit of firewood for the stove, gestures of compassion that Sarah would never forget, but which did not solve the problem. On a particularly hot and dusty afternoon, with the dry wind howling through the house and raising clouds of reddish earth that seemed to swallow the horizon, Sarah sat at the table mending an old pair of Tom's trousers, the smell of sweat and dust clinging to the air. The silence was so dense that she could hear her own heart beating. Suddenly, a distant but unmistakable sound caught her attention, breaking the oppressive stillness. The uneven and urgent gallop of a horse, coming from the east, a sound of desperation, followed by a dull, heavy thud, like something falling to the dry earth. A sound that seemed out of place, an unexpected event in the monotonous routine of misery. Worried, her maternal instinct on high alert, she stood up, telling the children to stay inside, away from any potential danger, her heart pounding. As she approached the barbed wire fence, her breath caught in her throat. She saw a figure fallen on the ground, about 50 yards away, beside an exhausted horse that was panting, its flanks rising and falling with difficulty, foam at its mouth. It was a man, and he seemed to be in serious trouble, his life hanging by a thread, lying under the scorching sun, amidst the vastness of the desert, a vulnerable dot in the relentless expanse. Fate, capricious and unpredictable, had just delivered a tragedy-disguised opportunity to her doorstep, and Sarah, moved by her innate kindness and an undeniable sense of duty, was about to open the door to the unknown, unaware that this act of pure compassion would change everything forever, beyond any dream. The relentless afternoon sun tinged the dust with an almost ethereal gold, casting long, distorted shadows as Sarah approached the fallen man, her heart pounding erratically against her ribs, a hammer in her chest announcing danger and urgency. The horse, a magnificent sorrel with gleaming coat, but now covered in sweat and dust, was panting and clearly exhausted, with a visibly injured front leg, a trickle of blood staining the dust. Despite its pain, the animal's eyes showed unwavering loyalty to its owner, watching him with an almost human sadness, as if pleading for help, a silent lament. The man, on the other hand, seemed in much worse condition. He was unconscious, his face pale and covered in dust, and scratches his clothes, though made of fine and obviously expensive fabric, were torn and stained, with dried blood in several places, a clear sign of the violence he had endured. A crumpled cowboy hat, made of high-quality felt, lay beside his head, almost hidden in the dust. Sarah, with the keen instinct of one who had faced pain and loss before, realized the gravity of the situation. He was severely wounded, perhaps on the verge of death, and needed help, desperately and quickly. Every second counted, and his life seemed to be draining away under the scorching sun, threatening to turn him into another forgotten victim of the desert. Without hesitation, overcoming her fear and the physical weakness that accompanied her, she ran back to the house, her voice filled with an urgency that startled Tom, who was struggling to chop wood, his expression tense. "Tom, come quickly. There's a wounded man out there, near the fence. He's very bad. We need to help him before it's too late." The boy, though apprehensive and a little frightened by the sight that awaited them, dropped the axe and ran with his mother, his feet kicking up dust. Together, with great effort and the strength that only extreme necessity can generate, they managed to drag the cowboy, a large and muscular man even unconscious, into the house. The task was exhausting for Sarah and Tom, whose bodies were already weakened by poor nutrition and constant labor. But the urgency of life spoke louder than fatigue. Sarah's muscles ached, but she didn't think of stopping, focused only on saving a life. Inside the house, by the faint, flickering light of the lantern Sarah lit, conserving kerosene, but without hesitation when a life was at stake, she could examine the man more closely. He had a deep, jagged wound on his head, bleeding slowly, a cut that seemed to have reached the bone. There was another wound on his leg, with his pants torn and flesh exposed, likely the result of a violent fall from his horse or a desperate, bloody struggle. His clothes, though dusty and torn from the accident, were visibly of better quality than their own, made of soft, well-sewn fabric, and his belt buckle, though simple in design, appeared to be made of solid, silver gleaming subtly in the faint light, indicating discreet wealth and perhaps high status. An intuition whispered to Sarah that this was no ordinary man, no mere traveler or poor wanderer. He exuded an aura of importance, of someone accustomed to wealth and command, even in his vulnerable, unconscious state. With the gentleness of one who treated her own sick family, Sarah cleaned the wounds with warm water and clean cloths using the little medicinal herbs she grew in her small parched garden to make a soothing and healing paste. She remembered her grandmother's teachings about treating serious injuries, applying the techniques with precision and care. Tom helped wrap the improvised bandages, made from scraps of old worn-out but clean sheets, sterilized with boiling water. While Lily and Billy watched everything with wide eyes, sometimes fascinated by the novelty and drama, sometimes frightened by the sight of the pale, motionless stranger. The man's breathing was shallow and irregular, a wheezing sound that filled the small house with apprehension, each inhalation seeming like a struggle for survival. Sarah knew the night would be long and uncertain, a battle against death, and that they would need a miracle for him to make it past morning. She covered him with a thin blanket, the best they had, and they stayed there, watching over his feverish sleep, hoping he would withstand the rising fever. In the days that followed, the cowboy's fever waxed and waned in waves, testing the Miller family's resilience to its limits. Sleepless nights followed, with Sarah changing cool cloths and praying in silence. Sarah and the children took turns caring for him with a devotion that bordered on personal sacrifice. Tom brought fresh water from the almost dry well, digging deeper each day with a rusty shovel, striving to find a little more moisture, and helped keep the house in order, a small guardian in training, feeling more like a man with each task completed. Lily, with her gentleness and angelic voice, prepared herbal teas for the fever and sang soft songs to the man, hoping to comfort him and perhaps soothe the torment in his feverish mind, her eyes hopeful. Billy, with the innocence of his age, drew funny pictures of cowboys and horses with his charcoal pencils and placed them beside the improvised bed, like a childish healing talisman, firmly believing in their magic. Despite the scarcity of resources that crushed them, the flour stocked dangerously low the last piece of bacon, almost gone the pot off and empty. Sarah shared the little they had with the stranger without a hint of selfishness. The last portion of chicken broth, prepared with their last chicken, a piece of bread meant for the children's lunch, all were offered in a desperate attempt to revive him and nourish his weakened body. Compassion was a luxury they could barely afford, a costly virtue in times of destitution. But for Sarah, it was a matter of humanity, an undeniable value passed down through generations. They were on the brink of an abyss, facing the imminent loss of everything they owned. But they would not abandon a human being in need on their doorstep, even if he was a complete stranger and an apparent burden. Meanwhile, the debt to Silas Blackwood relentlessly approached its due date. Blackwood, impatient and sensing the opportunity to profit and expand his lands, paid another visit, his wagon kicking up a cloud of dust on the ranch road. His unctuous and condescending voice filled the small house with veiled threats, his eyes coveting the miller's land. He noticed the stranger lying in bed, but scorned it, assuming he was just another wanderer, unimportant or penniless, whom Sarah had taken in out of her folly. "Mrs. Miller, the deadline is running out," he said, his small, greedy eyes sweeping the room with a glint of avarice, fixating on the family's few possessions. "I won't be so patient next time. Prepare to vacate your property in 3 days. My men will come to take possession." Sarah felt a chilling shiver of fear, a wave of despair flooding her, but she held her posture, her voice firm as she replied that she would do what she could without revealing the secret. Hope she held in her heart, a new hope born with the stranger's presence. With each passing day, the cowboy's recovery was slow but perceptible, like a stubborn sprout breaking through dry earth after a scarce rain. His health was still fragile, his movements slow and painful, but the fever finally began to subside, leaving behind a weakened but living body. On a particularly cool and quiet dawn, to everyone's relief, he opened his eyes. His deep, penetrating blue eyes fixed on Sarah with a mixture of confusion, weakness, and overwhelming gratitude, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. He tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse and weak, an almost inaudible whisper, like dry leaves in the wind. Sarah reassured him, saying he was safe and that they would take care of him, without pressing him for explanations. The cowboy, who finally introduced himself as John Blackjack Callahan, was a man of few words, somewhat enigmatic in his quietness, but his gratitude was evident in every glance, in every small gesture of recognition. He said little about himself, only that he was on a long journey when the accident happened, giving no details of his destination or purpose, maintaining an air of mystery that intrigued Tom. Sarah respected his silence, focusing on his recovery without asking intrusive questions about his past. She had no idea that this man's true identity and the reason for his journey were the key to a long-held secret, a treasure that would change their lives forever. The Millers' disinterested generosity, an act of pure compassion in the midst of adversity, was about to be rewarded in a way that would defy all expectations. A miracle disguised as misfortune that was announcing itself on the horizon, brighter with each passing day. With each passing day, John Callahan's strength returned, like water slowly filling a dry well after a drought, drop by drop, restoring life. He began to sit up in the improvised bed, his aching muscles adapting to the new routine of slow movements, and then to walk, dragging himself a little with the help of a rustic cane made by Tom from a sturdy, carefully trimmed branch. The presence of Black Jack, as he preferred to be called, brought a different, though tense, energy to the Miller Ranch, a mixture of mystery and an almost palpable hope that hung in the thin air. Despite his usual silence and imposing posture, he observed everything attentively, absorbing the Millers' daily struggle and Sarah's unbreakable dignity. He saw the evident scarcity, the cracks in the wooden wall, the few kitchen utensils, the boys' worn clothes, the weariness in Sarah's eyes, the children's thin faces, but also Lily's infectious laughter and Tom's silent determination, the way they worked tirelessly to help their mother without complaint. One afternoon, as Sarah prepared a thin stew with the last remaining vegetables from her small garden, smelling the faint aroma of the food spreading through the house, Black Jack called her. His voice, now firmer and less hoarse, carried a serious tone that made Sarah stop what she was doing, the spoon hovering in the air, anticipation building in her chest. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his blue eyes fixed on hers, his expression serious and somewhat somber. "I don't know how to thank you for all you and your children have done for me. You saved me, asking nothing in return, without even knowing me. I was on the brink of death, and you gave me life, welcomed me into your humble home, shared the little you had." Sarah, a little awkward and surprised by the intensity of his words and the emotion in his voice, just shook her head, her hands drying on her worn apron. "We did what was right, Mr. Callahan. No one should be left to die in the desert, no matter who they are." Black Jack hesitated for a moment, as if weighing each word before speaking it, seeking the clearest way to convey the weight of his revelation. "I know you are experiencing extreme hardship. I've seen it with my own eyes. The cracks in the wall, the almost dry well, the way you count every piece of bread, the weariness in your eyes, the shadow of debt over you. And I know your deadline with Banker Blackwood is running out. I heard his threats, the way he spoke to you, like a predator." Sarah stiffened, a wave of shame and surprise washing over her that he knew so many details of her life, of her imminent misfortune. But Black Jack continued, his voice low but laden with contained emotion, almost a confessional whisper that broke his usual reserve and made him more human. "I owe you a debt, Mrs. Miller. A debt of life, a debt of gratitude, a debt that no money can fully repay. But perhaps I can help with your financial problems. I can ease some of the burden you carry. In fact, I can do much more than just ease it." He paused dramatically, his expression becoming more intense, and then, with a frankness that made Sarah's heart pound, he revealed the truth he had been hiding, the secret that would turn their lives around and change their destiny forever. "My real name is Jonathan Sterling Callahan. I am the owner of the largest cattle ranch in Texas, the legendary Lone Star, with land stretching for miles as far as the eye can see and countless herds worth a fortune." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, as if he could encompass the vastness of his wealth, a stark contrast to the small house they were in. "I was on my way to San Antonio to close a vital deal for my business, the sale of a huge amount of cattle that would ensure the expansion of my business and consolidate my empire, when I was ambushed by a band of cattle rustlers, led by a cruel man. They stole everything I had, including crucial documents and a large sum of money, and left me for dead in the desert, thinking I wouldn't survive. I survived by a miracle, and by your unconditional kindness, which found me." Sarah was stunned, her hands trembling so much that the wooden spoon almost fell from her fingers. She felt her blood run cold and then boil. The man they had rescued from the brink of death, fed and cared for in their own poverty with the little they had, was one of the richest and most influential men in the entire West, an almost legendary figure whose name was spoken with respect and admiration by all. The news was so unexpected, so overwhelming, that for a moment she couldn't react, her mind struggling to process the information that turned her world upside down in an instant. The children, who were playing nearby, stopped their activities, their eyes wide, absorbing the cowboy's words, perhaps not fully understanding the dimension of the revelation, but sensing the change in the air. "I am a man of principles, Mrs. Miller," Black Jack continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction, each word laden with weight and promise. "And I would never forget the kindness and compassion shown to me in my moment of greatest need. You, in your own misery, when you had so little, gave me everything: shelter, food, and a chance to live. I have a plan to get back on my feet, to recover what was taken from me by the rustlers. It's a dangerous mission, and I cannot do it alone. I need your help, Tom's help. It's a dangerous task, but necessary for me to prove my identity and close the deal. And in return, I promise that your financial difficulties will be just a distant memory, a nightmare from the past that will never haunt you again. I will guarantee it with my word and my fortune." He explained that when attacked, in a last act of desperation and intelligence, he had managed to hide the important business documents and a considerable sum of money in a secret location, a natural crevice in an isolated and prominent rock, about 2 days' journey from there, near the main route to San Antonio. They were property papers, contracts, and a checkbook that would prove his identity. It was essential that he recover these items to prove his identity and ensure the closing of the $1 million deal in San Antonio, which had a tight deadline or risk losing everything. If he did not appear on the scheduled date, or if he could not present the property and sales documents, he would lose everything: his fortune, his reputation, and would be publicly dishonored. His life would crumble. But with his injuries still healing, he could not go alone. The journey would be too dangerous, and he needed allies, someone trustworthy, courageous, and loyal. The proposal was audacious and, for such a vulnerable family, terrifyingly risky. Jonathan Sterling Callahan was asking Sarah and Tom to venture into uncertain territory, perhaps still frequented by the same rustlers, to help him recover his fortune. The Lone Star Ranch was days away, and the location where the documents and money were hidden was isolated, a spot in the middle of the desert, perfect for an ambush. However, the alternative was grim and inevitable: losing the ranch to Blackwood, misery, and uncertainty. This was a ray of hope amidst almost total darkness, a unique and perhaps last chance to escape the abyss that awaited them, a light at the end of the tunnel. Sarah looked at her children, Lily and Billy, with their dirty but hopeful faces, watching her in silence, sensing the tension in the air, but trusting their mother. Tom, with his serious expression, but with a glimmer of adventure and determination in his eyes, as if already ready for the challenge that would come to become the man his family needed. The risk was great. The journey would be arduous and dangerous, full of uncertainties, but the reward, if all went well, would be salvation, freedom from a life of misery, and the promise of a future for her children. After a moment of intense reflection, a breath of courage filled her, driven by unconditional love for her children. She made her decision, her voice firm and full of new determination, echoing in the small house, an oath to fate. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her eyes meeting his, her conviction unwavering, "we will help you. We will go with you. It is the least we can do. After all you have told us and the trust you have placed in us, we trust you." That was the turning point, the crucial moment that would redefine their lives forever. The small Miller family, once at the mercy of fate and debt, was about to embark on a journey that would define not only their future and survival, but also reveal the true essence of their courage, resilience, and above all, their unwavering humanity. Helping a dying cowboy, an act of pure compassion in a world of adversities, had unlocked the door to a world of possibilities they could never have imagined. A path forged by kindness and faith that was about to lead them to a new dawn. With the decision made, the Miller home filled with a new, albeit tense, energy. A mix of nervousness and excitement hung in the air, like the scent of an impending desert storm, bringing both promises and perils. Preparations for the journey were meticulous, given their scarce resources. Sarah and Tom packed the bare essentials: a few pieces of jerky, hard biscuits, canteens filled to the brim with water, and a thin blanket. Black Jack, still recovering, but with a sharp mind and a photographic memory for the terrain details, guided Sarah and Tom on the path. He had a crude but accurate map drawn from memory on a worn piece of leather, indicating the exact spot where he had hidden the bag containing the crucial documents and money, a secret crevice in an isolated and prominent rock about 2 days away near the main route to San Antonio. Black Jack's horse, now recovered and eager to gallop, would be essential for the journey, as they had no other animal strong enough for the long trip. It was their only chance. The farewell to Lily and Billy was a heartbreaking moment, a lump in Sarah's throat. She hugged them tightly, her eyes welling with unshed tears, holding back her emotions so as not to frighten them, promising to return soon, and at this time, she would bring good news. News that would change everything forever. The nearest neighbor, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, a loyal friend who had previously helped the family on several occasions with a plate of food or a little flour, offered to care for the children during their mother's absence, reassuring Sarah with her gentle smile and words of encouragement, guaranteeing their safety. With scarce provisions, but with renewed hope bubbling in their hearts, Sarah and Tom, accompanied by Black Jack, set off at dawn, leaving the dusty ranch behind, heading towards the unknown, an uncertain future, but with the promise of a new beginning. The journey would not be easy. The scorching Texas sun turned every step into an ordeal, every mile covered into a test of physical and mental endurance. The heat was stifling, the air thin and dry, and the fine dust rose with every hoofbeat on the dry earth, impregnating clothes and lungs, making breathing difficult. They took turns on the horse sharing the load, and Black Jack, despite regaining his strength, still felt the effects of his injuries, the searing pain in his leg which slowed their pace, making the journey longer and more exhausting than expected. The vast and oppressive silence of the plain was broken only by the wind, howling through the canyons, the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves on the dry earth, and occasionally, the distant barks of coyotes or the solitary screech of a hawk in the cloudless blue sky hovering above them like an omen. Black Jack, despite his reserved nature and mysterious past, began to share some of his experiences with Tom and Sarah during their few rest stops in the shade of a rock or giant cactus. He spoke of the vastness of his ranch, the Lone Star, describing herds of cattle stretching to the horizon, like a river of moving animals, and the immense responsibility of managing an empire in the heart of the West. He spoke of the importance of land, cattle, honor, and a given word. Sarah listened intently, fascinated by the stark contrast between the luxurious and powerful life he described and her own precarious and humble existence, so close to destitution, imagining what it would be like to have such abundance. Tom, in turn, a boy eager for knowledge and adventure, asked insightful questions about cowboy life, herding techniques, cattle peculiarities, Western legends, and the stars that guided travelers at night, absorbing Black Jack's every word like a sponge. A silent and deep connection, began to form between the experienced old cowboy and the young boy, a kind of unofficial mentorship that transcended age and social origin, forging a bond of respect and admiration. On the second day of their journey, as they traversed a narrow and winding pass between two rocky hills, where echoes amplified every sound, they encountered an unexpected danger, a shadow from Black Jack's past that seemed to relentlessly pursue him. The sound of strong, disorganized galloping echoed behind them, each hoofbeat on a hard desert floor sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. 4 men, shadowy figures on fast, vigorous horses, appeared on the horizon, riding aggressively, their weapons drawn, their faces covered by bandanas, but the cruelty in their eyes was visible. They were the same rustlers who had attacked Black Jack, their silhouettes sharply outlined against the setting sun, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The tension in the air was palpable, cutting, like a sharp knife poised to strike. "They followed me," Black Jack whispered, his voice tense and filled with suppressed resentment. "They must have figured I'd return to the attack site to recover what I lost. They're like vultures." The rustlers, led by a tall, menacing man with a nasty scar across his face, a notorious bandit known as Scar, Jones infamous in the region for his violence and cruelty, were feared figures known for their brutality and for leaving no witnesses. They were determined to find what Black Jack had hidden, knowing it was something of great value, perhaps enough to make them rich forever. The situation was desperate. Black Jack was still weakened by his injuries and couldn't fight as he once did, his movements limited by pain, and Sarah and Tom were civilians, not warriors, with little combat experience. Sarah, despite feeling icy fear course through her veins, making her tremble, knew she had to act quickly and cunningly, that her children's fate depended on her. Tom, with a flash of courage in his eyes that surprised even himself, grabbed the old rifle his father had left behind, a rusty but still functional heirloom that had served to protect the family in John's time. Black Jack, with a strategist's mind, quickly devised a daring plan, a last desperate gamble. He and Tom would try to delay the rustlers, attracting their attention and firing to keep them at bay, creating a smokescreen, while Sarah, being smaller, more agile, and less conspicuous, would sneak to the rock crevice, retrieve the bag, and flee with the horse, trying to throw them off by taking a different, more circuitous path known only to a few. It was a risky plan, everyone's lives on the line, but it was their only chance of success against such relentless enemies. The fight was quick, brutal, and chaotic. The air was filled with the sound of dry gunshots echoing through the rocks, shouts of rage, and the startled whinnies of horses. Black Jack, using his cowboy experience and residual strength, managed to disarm one of the rustlers with a surprising move, using the handle of a trench shovel he carried. Tom, with surprisingly good aim for a boy who had barely fired a gun before, fired a warning shot that by luck or fate grazed another bandit's leg, making him scream in pain and fall from his horse. The distraction worked, creating a moment of confusion and hesitation among the rustlers. Sarah, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest, running faster than she ever had, reached the rock crevice, her hands scraping the rough surface as she squeezed through the narrow opening. She fumbled in the dark, her hand finally finding the heavy bag, filled with important documents and the unmistakable jingle of coins. With the bag firmly clutched, she mounted Black Jack's horse, the sorrel she had saved and who was now her only hope, and galloped off in another direction, a treacherous shortcut she had known since childhood, diverting the rustlers' attention, who, lured by the prospect of the treasure, pursued her in a furious chase. The rustlers' shouts of rage and imprecations echoed behind her, swearing revenge and vowing to catch her. But Sarah didn't look back. She rode like never before, adrenaline coursing through her veins, her loose hair whipping in the wind, her face streaked with dust and tears of exertion and fear. She knew that her children's lives and her family's survival depended on that bag and her successful escape. Meanwhile, Black Jack and Tom, using the terrain to their advantage and the agility of Black Jack's horse, which could move quickly among the rocks, managed to shake off the remaining rustlers who focused on pursuing Sarah, thinking she carried the biggest prize. They followed a false trail, allowing Black Jack and Tom to escape through a narrow and dangerous canyon, finding a temporary hiding place. Sarah's solo journey was lonely, exhausting, and fraught with danger. Every shadow seeming like a rustler, every sound a pursuing step. But she persisted with unwavering strength, driven by unconditional love for her children. She faced the scorching sun, excruciating thirst, and the constant fear of being caught. Finally, tired and dusty, her body aching with every movement, but victorious in her mission, she managed to reach the bustling city of San Antonio, the city's silhouette on the horizon appearing like a welcome mirage after the desert's vastness. Sarah and Tom's mission, an act of pure courage and loyalty, had been successful in its initial objective of recovering Black Jack's items, but the danger was not entirely over. They still needed to reunite and ensure the deal was closed before the rustlers caught up with them again in the city, or before Silas Blackwood, with his impatience and greed, acted and took the ranch. Tension and suspense had reached a new peak, and the fate of the Millers and of Black Jack remained uncertain, depending on the decisive next steps to be taken in the big city. Sarah arrived in San Antonio exhausted, but with the bag clutched tightly against her chest, as if her very life depended on it, and indeed it did. The city was a whirlwind of life, a constant buzz of activity that overwhelmed her, a stark and almost crushing contrast to the arid, dusty quiet of the ranch. Carriages pulled by well-groomed horses hurried through the cobblestone streets, their sounds muffled by the crowd. Elegantly dressed people thronged the bustling sidewalks, their voices blending into a distant chorus. And the smells of street food, tobacco, and sweat filled the air, a symphony of urban aromas she had never experienced. She felt small and lost in the midst of that vibrant, anonymous crowd, her eyes searching for a landmark. But the urgency of her mission propelled her forward, a beacon amidst the confusion, guided only by the mental map Black Jack had given her and by her unwavering faith. Black Jack had given her the address of the lawyer responsible for the deal, a renowned and respected jurist in the city, whose name was synonymous with prestige and influence, Dr. Andrew Thompson. Meanwhile, Black Jack and Tom, after shaking off the remaining rustlers in a frantic desert chase that lasted all night, headed for San Antonio by another more discreet route, using secondary trails and avoiding main roads, fearing that the bandits might have a network of informants in the city, or that the story of his miraculous return had already spread. Concern for Sarah was palpable. Black Jack, with his vast experience and knowledge of the dangers of the West, knew that the big city could be as treacherous and dangerous as the desert, especially for a lone woman carrying such a valuable treasure. He felt guilty for putting Sarah and Tom in such danger, but he trusted Sarah's unwavering determination and Tom's surprising courage, who had proven to be a true warrior and a loyal companion. Sarah finally found Dr. Andrew Thompson's office, an imposing and elegant red brick building in the city center, with tall windows and a polished brass plaque on the door announcing the lawyer's name in golden letters. Upon entering, she was greeted by a young, impeccably dressed secretary in a dark suit with an arrogant posture, who looked her up and down with visible suspicion, his eyes assessing her simple, dusty clothes, her disheveled hair. A dusty woman in ordinary clothes, of humble appearance, did not seem to have business with such an important lawyer. Sarah, however, maintained her composure, her dignity unshakable, refusing to be intimidated by the man's arrogance. "I need to speak with the lawyer immediately," she said, her voice firm and calm, despite the nervousness she felt, which made her sweat under the Texas sun. "It's about Jonathan Sterling Callahan, and it's extremely urgent. Tell him I have the documents he's waiting for." The name of the famous and powerful client finally made the secretary change his demeanor, his expression of disdain transforming into forced respect, almost fear, as he hurried to announce her visit. She was led to a luxurious waiting room, adorned with dark, carved wooden furniture, thick Persian rugs, and oil paintings on the walls, depicting bucolic landscapes and hunting scenes. Within minutes, the lawyer, a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose and a solemn, professional air, entered the room, his expression curious. He looked at her with surprise, making no effort to hide his astonishment at the figure before him. Sarah explained the situation in a few words, her voice choked with emotion and fatigue, and showed the stolen documents, carefully removing them from the bag, which she opened on the mahogany table. The lawyer, surprised by the unbelievable narrative of his client being attacked and saved by this woman, examined the papers carefully and thoroughly, his expression of skepticism transforming into genuine admiration as he recognized the authenticity of the documents. He was aware of Callahan's unknown whereabouts and the urgency of the million-dollar deal that was about to expire. The news of the documents' arrival, brought by this unexpected woman, was an immense relief and a turnaround he never expected. "Mrs. Miller, you have no idea of the importance of what you've done. You saved Jonathan Callahan's biggest deal," he said, his face showing astonishment and gratitude. At the exact moment the lawyer was preparing to take her to the business meeting, which was to take place in an adjoining room, the office door burst open with a bang that startled everyone in the room. Silas Blackwood entered, his stout figure filling the doorway, a triumphant, malicious smile on his face, accompanied by two brutal-looking henchmen with menacing gazes, their hands near their holsters, ready for any confrontation. Blackwood had followed Sarah to San Antonio, fueled by his avarice and determination to see the Millers' debt enforced, and perhaps to discover what else she was plotting in that big city. He knew Sarah wouldn't be in the city by chance, and his calculating mind had led him to that place, sniffing out profit. "Mrs. Miller," he exclaimed, his unctuous voice mixed with a thinly veiled tone of triumph. "It seems you have some important business here, far from your dusty, ruined ranch. I hope you are not trying to escape your financial obligations and the inevitable fate that awaits you." The lawyer, sensing the palpable tension and the atmosphere of threat Blackwood brought with him, immediately intervened, trying to protect his unexpected client and the valuable documents. "Mr. Blackwood, this is a private matter of my client, and it does not concern you. I ask you to leave." But Blackwood did not yield, his small eyes gleaming with malice and cruelty, his face red with anger. "I have a debt to collect from this woman, Dr. Thompson, and her days are numbered. The final deadline expired today. I came to take what is mine. The Miller Ranch will be my property, and there's nothing she can do." He shot a malicious, victorious look at Sarah, who felt a chill down her spine, but refused to lower her gaze, defying him with her own determination. The lawyer, aware of Blackwood's ruthless reputation and Sarah's fragile situation, tried to calm him and explain the situation regarding Callahan's documents, but Blackwood's stubbornness was unshakable, his mind fixed on greed and the certainty of victory. He was determined to humiliate Sarah and ensure she had no way out, that the ranch would be his, no matter the cost. It was at this moment of maximum tension, when hope seemed to fade again and the air was thick with oppressive silence, that the door opened once more, revealing an imposing and unmistakable figure. Blackjack, still limping slightly, but with an undeniable posture of strength, his blue eyes flashing determination, entered the office, accompanied by a serious and determined Tom, holding the rifle firmly in his hands, ready to protect his mother. His blue eyes, once clouded by pain and weakness, now shone with a cold, calculating determination, fixed on Blackwood, who froze, his mouth agape in shock, unable to believe what he saw. He had arrived in San Antonio, and sensing that something was wrong at the lawyer's office, he hurried there. Blackwood's surprise was evident. his eyes wide, his jaw dropping loosely. He could barely form words. Callahan? But how? His voice stammered, almost a whisper of disbelief and terror. You should be dead. I heard you were attacked and wouldn't survive. This is impossible. It's a ghost. Blackjack ignored Blackwood, his eyes fixed on Sarah, a glint of pride and relief in his gaze as he saw her there, victorious and unharmed, with the documents in hand. You did it, Mrs. Miller, he said, an almost imperceptible smile, yet full of gratitude and recognition, appearing on his lips, validating her effort. He turned to the lawyer, his voice resonating with authority and power, silencing Blackwood and his henchmen. We are ready for the deal, Doctor, and the documents are with me safe. Thanks to this lady and this brave young man. I asked that the meeting begin immediately. The lawyer, visibly relieved, impressed, and somewhat astonished by the turn of events, nodded enthusiastically, hurrying to arrange the papers. Mr. Callahan, it is an immense pleasure to see you recovered. Your documents are safe, thanks to this courageous lady and her son. Let's proceed. Blackwood, furious, perplexed, and tasting the bitter flavor of defeat, tried to intervene again, his voice laden with hatred and frustration, attempting to regain some control of the situation that was slipping from his hands. But Blackjack interrupted him, his grave and authoritative voice filling the tense silence of the room like thunder. Silas Blackwood, your time of tormenting this family is over. I am Jonathan Sterling Callahan, and this woman, Sarah Miller, and her children saved my life, risking theirs in an act of pure kindness. They are my protégés. And as a token of my eternal gratitude, I will pay all her debts to the last penny, with interest. And I will also ensure that your predatory tactics and your attempt at fraud are investigated by the authorities, and that you pay for them. Mr. Blackwood, your days of exploitation are over, and now get out of my sight. Blackwood's face paled further, the blood seemingly draining from his features, leaving them ashen. He staggered backward, terrified and humiliated, the fury in his eyes transforming into pathetic despair, while his henchmen cowered. The turnaround was complete and overwhelming. The dying cowboy, whom he had despised and underestimated, was the powerful Jonathan Sterling Callahan, and he stood there, strong and determined, to defend Sarah and her family. The climax had arrived, and the destiny of the Millers was about to be sealed not by death and misery, but by the extraordinary kindness and courage they had shown. Justice, after all, had found its way, and good prevailed over greed in an ending no one expected. The shocking revelation by Jonathan Sterling Callahan and his decisive intervention in the lawyer's office left Silas Blackwood in a state of shock and panic, bordering on total humiliation. His eyes wide with disbelief, he staggered backward, his features contorted by rage and terror, feeling the weight of his own greed. The man he had considered a dying wanderer or nobody was in fact one of the richest, most powerful, and most respected men in the West, a living cattle legend whose word was law and whose influence stretched across all of Texas. With fury and panic visible on his face, Blackwood realized he had not only lost his chance to take the Miller ranch, but also his reputation as a ruthless usurer, his name now stained by shame and dishonor, his empire of cruelty and ruins. Blackjack, with an eerie calm and a voice of unwavering authority, instructed the lawyer to arrange for the full payment of Sarah's debt, down to the last penny, and to include a significant penalty for Blackwood for his dishonest tactics and his attempt at extortion. The usurer, humiliated and defeated, left the office with his henchmen, his shoulders slumped, his image of power shattered before the eyes of the law and everyone who witnessed his downfall. From that memorable day, the lives of Sarah and her children changed in a way they could never have dreamed of in their most desperate moments. Jonathan Sterling Callahan, a man of impeccable word and honor, fulfilling his promise, not only cleared the Miller ranch's debt to the last cent, freeing them from a nightmare that had lasted years but also made a substantial investment in the property, ensuring that they could not only rebuild but prosper unimaginably. The well, once dry and useless, was renovated and deepened, gushing fresh, abundant water, a true oasis amidst the drought. New corn and wheat seeds, the best money could buy, were planted and healthy. Numerous cattle once again grazed in the now lush green fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Miller Ranch, once a symbol of despair and struggle, flourished again, stronger, more vibrant, and more prosperous than ever, a living testament to the transformation that kindness could bring. The house was renovated, gaining new furniture, a spacious kitchen, and comfortable bedrooms. Black Jack, in turn, never forgot the family who welcomed him in his moment of greatest weakness and saved him from certain death. He became a present and benevolent figure in the Millers' lives, a kind of godfather and guardian. He visited them regularly, offered valuable advice on ranch management, sharing his vast knowledge of the land and cattle accumulated over years, and ensured the children had access to quality education, hiring private tutors and providing books and materials that were once an unattainable luxury. The relationship between him and Tom deepened and became one of the most significant in the boy's life. Black Jack, seeing the innate potential in the young man, his intelligence, his determination, and his sense of responsibility, began to train him in the intricacies of the cattle business, sharing his vast experience and wisdom, preparing him for the future. Tom, who once hunted small animals to survive and mended fences with child's hands, now dreamed of managing large herds and becoming a respected rancher. His future shaped with the invaluable help of an unexpected mentor, someone who saw him not as an orphan, but as a future leader and his spiritual heir. Lily and Billy also benefited immensely from the new reality. Lily, with her creativity and artistic soul, gained access to rare books, renowned music lessons, and top-quality art supplies from distant cities. Her drawings, once made with charcoal on wooden walls, now exploded in vibrant colors, proudly displayed in the renovated house in ornate wooden frames. Billy, with the innocence and inexhaustible energy of his age, could finally enjoy a full and happy childhood with new toys, clean clothes, and the freedom to play, without the worries and the shadow of hunger that once haunted their home. His laughter echoing through the ranch, filling the air with joy and vitality. He learned to ride a pony and helped feed the calves, feeling part of something bigger. Sarah, the woman who never gave up, who faced destitution with dignity and tragedy with courage, finally found the peace and security she so richly deserved. She continued to work hard on the ranch, with the same dedication as before, but now with the joy and lightness of knowing that her children's future was secure, that they would have a chance to live a better life than hers, a life of opportunities and fulfilled dreams. She and Black Jack developed a deep friendship, based on mutual respect, admiration, and a gratitude that went beyond words. Although they never had a romance, their paths were distinct, and their hearts, though close, came from different worlds. The connection between them was undeniable, a bond forged in adversity and pure human kindness. They were an unlikely family, united by fate and the strength of their hearts, an example of how unity can overcome any obstacle. The Miller's story spread throughout the region, crossing rivers and mountains, becoming an inspiring tale of hope, resilience, and humanity. The community, once powerless to help, now saw living proof that compassion, even in difficult times and amidst the greatest scarcity, can bring the greatest and most unexpected rewards. That simple act of helping a dying cowboy, a disinterested gesture of charity, by a woman who had so little, had not only saved a family from the deepest misery, but also redefined what was possible, transforming misfortune into a miracle that inspired everyone, teaching the true value of kindness. Years passed. Tom grew up and became a respected and successful rancher, managing not only the significantly expanded Miller Ranch, but also a substantial part of Jonathan Sterling Callahan family's vast cattle business, who considered him a son, his heir in every sense, entrusting him with great responsibilities. Lily became a talented artist whose work sold throughout the West and even in distant cities celebrated the beauty, the resilience of rural life, and the strength of family bonds, her art becoming a legacy and a source of inspiration. Billy, with his infectious good humor and gentle nature, became a happy and prosperous man dedicated to his own family, always fondly remembering his mother's sacrifices and the miraculous intervention of the cowboy who changed their lives forever. The poor widow, Sarah, aged with the serenity of one who had fulfilled her mission and saw her children prosper beyond her wildest dreams. She never forgot the most important lesson of all, that true wealth lies not in money or possessions, but in the ability to offer help, to extend a hand to those in need, to show compassion, even when one has little or nothing to lose. It was disinterested kindness, a simple act of humanity in a wild and often cruel world, that opened the doors to a new dawn, proving that compassion, when sown in the fertile soil of humanity, always reaps the most unexpected and beautiful fruits, transforming lives and leaving a lasting legacy that would echo for generations. The story of the Millers and Black Jack Callahan became a legend, an eternal reminder that in the untamed heart of the Old West, humanity, hope, and kindness would always find a way to prosper, even in the most improbable circumstances. And you? What act of kindness, however small, do you believe can change someone's destiny? Share your story in the comments below.